Well, welcome to the Bookshelf Odyssey podcast. My name is Art, and I'm the host, and I'm joined with a special guest, a returning guest with us today, Juno Jakob. He has just published a new short novel that's coming out this week on November 18th. It's called Atticus, and it is inspired by real-life events in his life, and it tells the story of a man's struggle with schizophrenia and some other issues of mental health. It's a very personal and at times heartbreaking story, but it's one that I found to be a very powerful and moving story. So Juno, welcome to the Bookshelf Odyssey podcast.
Hello.
Good to have you back on again.
Yeah, it's really nice to be back on again.
Last time we gushed over our love for Ray Bradbury, so that was it's always fun to find another fan.
Yeah, I can't get enough of Bradbury.
I'm going to start doing a Ray Bradbury short story reading club with some people online. We're just going to pick one or two stories to start off with, read one or two a month, and then just film a video of us discussing what we read. And so the first one here in November, if anyone listening wants or watching wants to join in, we're reading A Sound of Thunder, which is one of the first of his short stories I read. And Juno, I'm sure you know that story.
Oh, yeah.
And that was the first one of his that I read that kind of left me like, whoa, what just happened? That was cool.
Yeah, it's a great story.
I just wanted to make sure I've mentioned that, as it's kind of a new thing I'm doing, and getting the word out about that to all who might be interested. I have a Discord channel. I'll have that link in the show notes if you're interested in reading some Ray Bradbury short stories with us. I've really enjoyed meeting people online and talking about some of my favorite books and stories with folks. It just gives you a deeper appreciation for some of those stories that you're so familiar with. So I'm looking forward to it. But Juno, so you've got a new novel coming out this week. Can you kind of just tell us a little bit about yourself and the story and how it all came together?
Talking about myself first is I was diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia when I was 15 years old. And I was sent to, over here we call them psychiatric units, but I'm not sure what you call them in the States. I think the words like mental hospital are a bit old-fashioned. They don't like to use them anymore.
Mm-hmm.
They've, a bit more friendly. So I assumed like the word mental hospital has lots of connotations with it and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So we try not to use those sort of words anymore. So I was sent there when I was 15, between finishing my school and starting college. So I spent the summer in the hospital. And, someone who essentially lost touch with what was going on in the world, what was going on around me, like it was a very safe place to be. At first, it seems kind of scary because, I read, Ken Kesey's One Flew Over the Cuckoo Nest at a young age. So
Mm-hmm.
I had those images in my head when I first went to the hospital, but I soon found out, like, people are there to help. There's all these options, but maybe I'm getting ahead of myself, is because when I first went to the hospital, I was not in touch with what was going on. I very much lost it.
Mm-hmm.
I was having hallucinations, delusions, paranoia, depression. I was very out of it. So that happened, and then I came out and I went to college, and I sort of got on with life and went to university. And when I got into university in my third year, Ray Bradbury died.
Mm.
And I decided then I was going to start writing fiction. I'd already started in my university courses. I was doing screenwriting and filmmaking. So I was like, well, that's a logical step. Next step would be just writing fiction. So honestly, to the day after he died, I started writing fiction. So we flash forward a few years, and Bradbury had gone. So I really wanted to write a novel about mental health and mental illness because I feel like, although it's been done before, especially people like Ken Kesey writing Cuckoo's Nest, and
Mm-hmm.
there's another book I read by Joanne Greenberg
Mm-hmm.
called "I Never Promised You a Rose Garden,"
Sure.
which is based on her experiences going to a psychiatric hospital. So I started writing this novel. That is the first draft is very different to the book that was actually published, which comes out next week or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
The original title of the novel was Dear Mr. Bradbury,
Mm.
and essentially it was the same, but it was Dylan Samuel, the main character in the novel. He's about 27, and he has schizophrenia. But at the time when I was writing the first draft, Dylan wasn't in a hospital until the last 20 pages. So I wrote that, and I wasn't completely happy with it. There was a lot of it I didn't like. I tried to clonk together certain things, but it didn't quite work. So I left it and I put it aside, and I started writing the Halloween book.
Mm-hmm.
And without getting depressing or anything, about a month and a half after the Halloween book came out, last October, a 10-year relationship broke down, and the relationship ended.
Mm-hmm.
And I was homeless for a little while and all this sort of stuff. I had another mental breakdown, and I was sent back to hospital. And I was sent to, for anyone who wants to look it up, it's St. James Hospital in Portsmouth in Hampshire in the UK. It was a really big Gothic building, very big, but now they've shut all that down. And it's these two little hospitals with about 15 rooms each, bedrooms. There's only about 30 beds in the whole hospital.
Mm-hmm.
And while I was there, my hallucinations and things, I kind of had this epiphany of, well, I think the story works a lot better if you kind of reverse that first draft of have Dylan in the hospital for the whole book and then the last 10 pages. So Atticus, the book itself, has taken about 5 years to write. It may not seem that because it's quite short, but it's taken about 5 years of going through about 9 different drafts. And the big thing was it was called Dear Mr. Bradbury as a tribute to Bradbury. And also the thing, I was really stuck on this sort of like 5th draft, and it really wasn't working, and I couldn't figure out why. And then one day I was at work. I worked at a hardware store, and I was thinking about what wasn't working, and I realized in the first draft, the first 4 or 5 drafts, Dylan wrote letters to Ray Bradbury. So these letters were interspersed throughout the whole book. And 2 reasons. I suddenly had a thought that, one, I don't want to get sued by Ray Bradbury's estate.
Uh-huh.
I thought that might get me in trouble. And then second, I was like, they don't work because it's almost like Atticus being my first written novel, I was kind of forced something that wasn't working. And that old term of, you need to kill your darlings.
Mm-hmm.
Some stuff doesn't work. So I took the draft, took all the letters out, and so I took all the letters out, and I had a slimmer book, much more concise, much more to the point. And then the Halloween book took over, and I wrote the Halloween book. And then flash forward to May of this year, I was sent to St. James Hospital, not under a section. Over here, it's called sectioning, but I guess in the States, it's called being committed.
Mm-hmm.
So I wasn't forced to go. I went voluntarily,
Okay.
which is a big difference between being sectioned and going voluntarily.
Yeah.
So I went knowing that I was not very well, or am not very well. Um, and along with me at the hospital was one of my hallucinations, which is a fox named Atticus.
Mm.
He's kind of like, it's kind of like having a little pet that doesn't make much mess. You know,
Yeah.
he's there probably 90% of the time, um, even with medication and things like this. But I was looking at Atticus and I realized the whole I'm the novel needs to be set in a hospital because I haven't heard for a long time a novel written about hospitalization written during a hospitalization.
Mm.
So in a psychiatric ward, you have a lot of time on your hands. You know, there's not much to do except stare at the pale walls and take your pills. So
Mm-hmm.
I started writing. So I brought in, when I was admitted to the hospital, I brought in the sort of, I don't know, was it like the seventh draft of what became Atticus? And I was allowed a pen. So I started annotating it and I removed all the stuff that didn't work. And I really condensed it down to this novel needs to be confined within the walls of the hospital because this is how I am feeling right now. And I need to be honest about those feelings of, you know, you're in a 12 by 9 room being watched every 15 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
So I really hunkered down and really got into it. And yeah, so I finished the book during a second hospitalization in August, and the
Mm.
novel was finished.
From what I understand, some of Dylan's experiences that are similar to yours, that and you've kind of written some real life into this story.
Yes, the foreword for the novel is written by a man named Dr. Thomas Richardson. He is
Mm-hmm.
the associate professor of clinical psychology at Southampton University. He was my therapist for about 2 years before I was hospitalized again. And a lot of throughout Atticus, there are sessions with Francis, the therapist, who's Dylan's therapist.
Mm.
And I based Francis Romero on Tom. And I took almost word for word the sessions I had with Tom and fitted them into novel with Dylan and Francis. So the things Dylan talks about are word for word what I talked to Tom about.
Yeah. What I guess what I appreciate about this is often we see hospitals like that as a place of like horror or scary stories are written there, and the psychologists and doctors are mistreating their patients and all that. But this really tells a different story, and I think dare I say a positive one, even though the subject matter is very very serious and very heavy. I really enjoyed those scenes between Dylan and his therapist. It was almost tender at times, and I really appreciated that.
Again, the amount of people I've since coming out of hospital, I've seen friends and stuff,
Mm,
and some people I know in passing have said things like, "You've just have you just been in the nut house?"
mm,
And it's like there's still this stigma against psychiatric units and hospitals that it's a big gothic building and it's full of people locked behind bars and they're all screaming at themselves and being
mm-hmm.
mental and being crazy. You know, and that all the psychologists are giving forced electroshock therapy and padded cells and all this sort of stuff. And then you get there and you realize everyone in there is there for a reason. They're there because they're dangerous necessarily.
Mm-hmm.
With being honest, a few are, but they're kept on other wards. Or in like over here we have um, sort of the national health system, the NHS. So there's sort of in quotes, a normal psychiatric hospital for people struggling, and
Mm-hmm.
then we have criminal hospitals, like the infamous Broadmoor.
Sure.
And people believe that all psychiatric hospitals are like Broadmoor, where they keep, very dangerous people.
Yeah.
And I can only talk from personal experience of, being in St. James, which I renamed St. John's in the novel,
Mm.
is that, you know, you go there and you're not, I, before I went, when I was having the assessment, I was, I had to go to another like a general hospital, and I talked to the mental health ward, and I was convinced Nazis were coming for me.
Mm.
And I was having a real trouble believing that Nazi soldiers were really the doctors and the nurses were actually Nazis. And I didn't go outside my house for 2 weeks before I was admitted. I was really losing it.
Mm-hmm.
And then I got there, and when I got to the hospital, I was expecting they would, strip me down, hose me down, like Shawshank when Andy
Yeah.
Dufresne goes in. I was expecting that, and the guards, nurses to be like that. But I got there and I realized I can wear my own clothes, with the exception of, you know, uh, danger items they call it, or harmful items like shoelaces.
Yeah.
Um, I was allowed to take in any books I wanted. I was allowed to take in, comfort things. You're not sharing a room with 12 other people. You get your own bedroom with your own private bathroom. And, after the initial couple of days of being like, I don't know who the Nazis are, I started to relax.
Mm-hmm.
And slowly over time with Atticus and Nash, who I'll explain in a second, I came to realize, no, you need to use all of your weapons to fight schizophrenia. So things like medication, things like therapy, things like even just going out into the a social room in the ward, having a cup of tea or coffee with the nurses and just talking to them. And you
Mm-hmm.
realize you have this kind of eureka moment a few days in where you're like, well, I realize now I'm not well. And it's probably the best place for me to be here right now because there's support and people are there. I couldn't stress it enough that people don't seem, not all people, but the general public don't seem to know the difference between a prison and a psychiatric hospital.
Mm.
I think people think they're the same thing. You only go to a hospital if you're in legal trouble or something.
Right.
But no, you go because you need help. And like I said, I went voluntarily. They called up the hospital and they said, we've got a bed available,
Mm-hmm.
so we'd like you to go in. And within 3 hours, I was put in.
Mm.
But I wanted to end that stigma of like Nurse Ratched, one flew over the cuckoo's nest sort of mentality, and change people's ways of thinking about psychiatric units. And the ideal reader for Atticus would be a scared 17-year-old who's just developed schizophrenia and is worried about going into hospital.
Mm-hmm.
That was my goal.
Yeah, and I can see that. I don't give away spoilers or anything. I mean, but the story itself is very, very, very simple and simply told. Like you said, it all takes place for the most part in the hospital. But having read some of your short stories in your book, I had no idea really what to expect as I started it. But and it turns out that the really the thing that's probably haunting him most is his own mind, and that and he comes to realize the doctor is there to help him, and like you said, using the weapons that you have, the medication, the therapy, all that, and that it's a very positive experience, which I think you're right there, that we don't see that a lot in literature anymore, or at all, and maybe that should change.
Yeah, like I said, it always seems like, and I've read a fair bit. There's there's a couple of influences on the novel that I really thought about. There's obviously the idea of Cuckoo's Nest and things like that. Of it's all set in the hospital, and for those who don't know, who haven't read the novel One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, the book is told from Chief's point of view, whereas the film isn't.
Mm-hmm.
So many people have seen the film, but I don't think that many people have read the novel. Whereas Chief Borden is like he's a very unreliable narrator. It's he himself has schizophrenia in the novel,
Mm.
so the things he's observing are seen through a filter of mental illness.
Mm-hmm.
So I like that idea of seeing a ward through the eyes of a schizophrenic rather than having, you could have written it from a nurse's point of view, but you wouldn't have had that confusing, almost surreal narrative that kind of goes hand in hand with being in a hospital where you're unsure of what's going on around you. I wanted to
Mm.
try and capture schizophrenia on a page. So when the reader reads it, they're like, I don't know, like there's a without again, I don't want to spoil anything, but within
Yeah.
the sort of the first few chapters, uh instead of like I have problems with paranoia about Nazis, in the novel, Dylan has trouble with witches. It's in because my little fictional town of Porthampton is kind of based on where I am right now, Portchester in Hampshire, and
Mm-hmm.
it's kind of based on Salem, Massachusetts, which is I've been to. I loved it. So I
Mm.
kind of blended those two towns together to make my little town.
Mm-hmm.
So in even in some of my short stories, it's mentioned, and it's mentioned in the Halloween book. There was witch trials in Porthampton in the 1600s, and that's kind of fed into Dylan's paranoia that all delusions, which are like falsely held beliefs, come from something
Mm-hmm.
They don't just form out of they just form out of random things you've stored in your mind. We learn a lot about World War II in this country. I suppose you do as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I always imagined that Dylan would have learned about the witch trials in school, and later in life they've sort of backfired on him.
Mm.
And Francis tries to talk about the history of it without upsetting him, and they kind of try and get to the root of this delusion that Dylan thinks witches are out to kill him, and he's not sure which nurses or which doctors are witches, and he's always on the lookout. And just he's on paranoid level 5. And then another influence was I really don't want him to be mad. I've only ever written to him, so I don't know how you say his name. There's an author named John Katzenbach. I don't know if you've heard of him.
No, I don't think so.
He wrote a book called The Madman's Tale. And I read this book when I was in hospital after school. And on the surface, it's just a murder mystery set in a 1970s psychiatric hospital.
Mm-hmm.
And it's told through the point of view of a young schizophrenic who's been put into this overcrowded, understaffed hospital in the 70s in Massachusetts. And he has to himself, he's been sort of abandoned by his parents. He doesn't have many friends. So when he gets to the hospital, he's on his own, and he has to learn on his own how to keep his wits about him and sort of navigate the ward and the hospital. And when this murder happens in the hospital, an investigator is called in, and the character, the schizophrenic in the Madman's Tale, throughout the book, he kind of learns to figure out schizophrenia.
Mm-hmm.
And when I was reading that in hospital, being put into hospital for schizophrenia, it was incredibly inspiring to read about the way Katzenbach writes it is phenomenal. You would believe Katzenbach had schizophrenia, but
Mm-hmm.
He's told me that I've been privileged enough to talk to him for the last sort of 10 years. And he told me that he based it on his brother-in-law, who was sent to an overcrowded, understaffed hospital. And that book really inspired me when I was in hospital. I was like, if this guy can overcome schizophrenia and outthink it, then it's possible. And the last influence, so 3 books. So there's a bit of Cuckoo's Nest, a bit of The Madman's Tale. The third book is a biography of John Forbes Nash Jr.
Yeah.
A Beautiful Mind.
Yep.
And the ironic thing is, John Nash is one of my hallucinations. So it's kind of like an Inception deal going on.
Yeah.
But a schizophrenic sees another schizophrenic.
Yeah.
It's very odd, but Nash is one of my hallucinations. I remember reading the book. I was given the book by someone, and I read about it. And, Nash was incredibly smart. Some might say a bit arrogant about it. He was at the top of his field. And according to his wife, within a few days, his personality just changed. He started acting really strangely. And he was eventually diagnosed with schizophrenia. And he lost everything. His work, he wasn't able to do, he was a mathematician, he couldn't do maths anymore. He was just very unwell for years. And this man spent decades in this schizophrenic fog. And then after 30 years, he suddenly clicked that he would challenge his schizophrenic thinking. Like, he made a conscious decision to challenge this strange thinking and these delusions. And he re-emerged in the late 80s. And then he was nominated for the Nobel Prize. And he won.
Yeah.
In 1994. I think most people probably know the film.
Yeah. But, yeah, I haven't read the book. Yeah, but I've seen the movie.
Yeah, I find Nash to be an incredible inspiration. If I'm having trouble, I think of Nash. So I wanted to write a story of like how tragic madness can be to someone who is very in tune. Like in Atticus, Dylan's a writer like me. I wanted it to sort of show like you lose so much to this, but there's so much more to gain if you can outthink it.
Sure.
And reemerge.
Yeah. So I was, and maybe, and please correct me if this isn't right, but what I found interesting, I think of schizophrenia as harmful, or, it's bad, obviously, but I found it interesting that the character's mind created these hallucinations that could also be helpful to him. At least it seemed that way. Is that kind of a right understanding on that sometimes they can be a help?
They can, like, this is where it gets confusing because
Sure.
the novel is called Atticus and my hallucinations also called Atticus, who I named the novel after. So I personally see a little fox called Atticus, and he is always helpful. If it's very odd, but say like I'm walking down the street, he'll be there, and if someone's behind me or something or coming up near me, he will react. So I'll be like, right, I need to look. And he'll watch cars go past, and like it's stuff like that. And I adore foxes. I mean, I feed the foxes here every night. And I spent in 2016, I made a whole film about foxes, just because I wanted to be around foxes. And one of the foxes I saw when I was making this film was a wounded fox that had been unfortunately shot with a crossbow. Someone had shot an arrow through the back of this fox's head, and the arrow was coming out of his cheek. And I remember being sad seeing him, and luckily the fox survived, and we released him back out into the wild. But that's a memory that just got plugged up in my head, and then years later it came as an hallucination, and he hasn't left since.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and Nash Nash doesn't do much. It's nice to see him. It's like that's John Nash,
Yeah.
but I've become more aware now. I'm like, no, that's a hallucination because there's not an 80-year-old man sitting at the end of my bed. You know what I
Right.
mean?
Yeah.
It's very. He was in hospital with me as well. Well, he wasn't, but you know what I mean.
Yeah.
I saw him in hospital and stuff like that. He just says numbers to himself, but it's kind of like seeing Nash, and it's not Russell Crowe from the film. It's the John Nash.
Mm-hmm.
People get that confused when I tell them that. It's the actual. It looks like the real John Nash,
Sure.
and my logical brain is like, that's not John Nash because Nash died 5 years ago in a car crash.
Hmm.
So I know that's not real, but it's still there. Like even knowing it's not real doesn't stop it. So on the other side of having Atticus and Nash, which I consider good hallucinations, you do have horrific ones that are terrifying. And when they hit, there's no one can sort of snap you out of it or shake it out of you. Like it's there. Like one of Dylan's worst hallucinations are bugs. I see bugs all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not talking about like one spider on the wall. I'm talking about like the whole corner of the house covered in bugs, cockroaches, spiders, beetles, all this sort of stuff. Sometimes I see bugs in my food and I can't eat, and I have to make new dinners and stuff like this. Like,
Mm.
and there's another hallucination that makes the hair on the back of my neck stand up, but I don't want to spoil it because it's also in the novel.
Mm.
And
Yeah.
when that shows up, it's really nerve-wracking. It
Mm-hmm.
happens maybe once a week. With medication, it happens about once a week, but when it hits, it's bad.
I want to say that I think things like this will be good to help us to continue to normalize, discussions around mental health and the need to be able to talk openly and safely about it. In our family, we've got some that, struggle with depression and anxiety. And I think on some level, there's a lot of people struggling with even just minor bouts of that. It's been a crazy last couple of years, really just intense. But I've seen it. There's just a need to destigmatize it, as I think you said, that we can be open and talk about this, that that can start us down a good and better path to, overall being more healthy, and at least, or at the very least, knowing how we can help others who might be struggling with things that we just don't know about or aren't aware of.
I found it very therapeutic writing the book, because another sort of based on things that actually happened to me is after um, after my relationship broke down, I was homeless, so I lived with two of my best friends for about 3 months, and
Mm-hmm.
I kind of took that experience and put that in the novel. Of
Mm-hmm.
three, like a group of friends, and two of them are looking after their unwell friend because he needs help, and they kind of take him in and look after him and things like this. I took that from real life and put it in the novel. Um, I took, Tom and all our therapy sessions, put that in the novel and things like this.
Yeah.
So, I mean, if you were to change Dylan Samuel to Juno Jakob, it would pretty much be an autobiography.
Mm.
Like, it's really close to the things that have happened in sort of the last 5 years, although sort of condensed and put into one hospital stay where there's been several.
Mm-hmm.
Just kind of condensing it and distilling it into one story.
Stories like that, I always say, well, I enjoyed reading that, but I don't know if, enjoyed is the right word. I'm glad I read it. And it is a very powerful story, and a very personal one, as I mentioned, that for me, that I have, it helped me understand schizophrenia better. Something I don't personally struggle with, and really had little idea about what it even was. But then being able to see a character, live it and go through it, it really helped inform me better on what it is that they struggle with, and what they experience. And just I mean, it was just good. And I really have appreciated your writing. It's you're a great writer. I can't wait to keep reading more of what you've put out, but it's a really compelling story.
Yeah, it's like you said about not knowing what schizophrenia is.
Mm-hmm.
They did a survey recently. Maybe we could put the link up or something.
Mm-hmm.
They asked people, what do you think schizophrenia is? And a very high number said it was split personality, which is not true. Split personality is called dissociative identity disorder, and it's incredibly rare.
Yeah.
Schizophrenia affects roughly 1 in 100 people.
Oh, wow.
It's not very uncommon. Some people might have it for a few weeks, or a few days, or months. Other people, it's recurring and it's chronic, and it will just stay with them.
Mm-hmm.
There's no that hundreds of years after people figured out these sort of symptoms were part of one disorder, they still don't know what causes it. It just happens. Some people say it's organic, or some people say it's based on the environment you're brought up in, or like for some reason, people living in the city have a much higher rate of schizophrenia than people living in the country, which is odd.
Yeah.
So some people think it's environmental that causes it. Some people think it's brain damages in childbirth. There's lots of different theories of what causes it. But if you were to put, quote unquote, a sane brain next to a schizophrenic brain on a scan, you wouldn't be able to see a difference. Like, you can't see schizophrenia. It's only after sort of a year of therapy and observations that you're given a diagnosis. It takes quite a while to be diagnosed and get to the root of you have schizophrenia. Now, a few years ago, I got in trouble for saying the word schizophrenic, which is odd, because I wouldn't know what else to. If someone asked me what are you schizophrenic, I would say yes. But that sounds like a minefield, so I'm probably not going to go into that.
Yeah. And yet, and then through all of this, you still, have this vision, this passion to keep writing, and to write your story, like you said, as a way to inspire others, perhaps to, you mentioned that the ideal audience would be that, scared 17-year-old boy who maybe just got that diagnosis. And
that's what I wanted to write for.
Yeah.
I wanted someone to take the novel and find it as helpful as I found A Beautiful Mind or The Madman's Tale or something. I wanted someone to be like, someone else understands what's happening to me, and hopefully this book will help them.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and that, again, that the book will be available this week, November 18th. You can get it on Amazon, everywhere. And I'd really recommend you folks pick it up. It was a very moving story. And like I said, one I appreciate reading. I gave me a lot of insight that I didn't know. So yeah, good story.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
I'm really happy that after sort of 5 years of writing, it's coming. It's going to be out, and people are going to be able to pick up copies and stuff.
Yeah.
It's a big deal.
Yeah, definitely.
I was really, when I got the first copy today, I was very teary, just knowing, like, going through, I'm 32 now, so going through 15 years of mental illness and hospitalizations and different medications, like, it come to the point now where I'd actually published my book about it. It was a big sort of sigh of happiness and like I did it.
It's kind of like a big life goal that you've just reached. So
Yeah, it really was. This book
yeah,
especially.
well, we'll be hoping and wishing you all the luck as it hits the bookstores now. And folks, again, pick it up. It's well worth the read. We are quickly running out of time here, but I do want to also just take a few minutes to talk about writing as a craft.
I learned that when people say you can't do it, you show them different and you do it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if someone had told me in 2012, you know, June 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 7th, 2012, that in less than 10 years you'd have two short story collections and two novels published, I wouldn't have believed them. But I think if people say you can't do it, then you've got to do it. And you should do it because you love to do it. Don't let people. I write stories about giant pumpkins eating people to a novel about a man struggling with schizophrenia. Like, don't get
Mm-hmm.
picky and be pigeonholed into one thing. You know, if you like writing sci-fi, that's fine. Like, love sci-fi and read all the vastness of science fiction and gather all these metaphors and all this sort of stuff from there. That will fill your head with whatever you love and it will channel into your own writing. Don't be snobby about anything. If you like Edgar Allan Poe, great. But if you like Peanuts or you like J.K. Rowling or you like Harry Potter, you know, all this sort of stuff, it doesn't matter
Mm-hmm.
what you like as long as you love it. And
Mm-hmm.
if you love it, it will filter into your own writing, and it will be good writing because you love it.
Mm.
That's what I think.
Yeah, yeah. It's I've just been reading a book. Oh, and I can't remember the title now, but it's something about I don't have it here. Reading. It's basically it's just a book talking about the joy of reading in a distracted age and how let's maybe not be so caught up in, I have to read the classics and the great works of literature or I'm not a well-read person. And his whole thing is, just read what you love and let your passion dictate to you what you read. And I really appreciated that. I'll probably have to talk about it at some point here in an upcoming episode or something, because it was just, I'm just like highlighting this book all over. Like, yes, yes, yes. I agree with this so much, and it's the same about writing. I would expect, write what you love, which, people can write to market, that sort of thing and write for hire. But I think you really can tell when it's done out of love and out of passion for something. There's just a difference in writing style even.
Well, like the Halloween book, which we
Mm-hmm.
covered on a past episode,
Mm-hmm.
the real metaphor of the Halloween book is Halloween in the last sort of 20 years has, in England especially, it's slowing down. People don't do it as often. Not many people go trick or treating. We don't get as much decorations in shops. We don't really, it's declining. So I wanted to write a metaphor that was like saving Halloween from what it was sort of in 1995, 93.
Mm-hmm.
So the metaphor of the Halloween book is just saving Halloween, not, you know, like they do in the novel, but just like trying to remind people, like, remember how much you loved Halloween as a kid. Like, hopefully reading that book, it'll sort of reignite that love and be like, I remember what it was like in 1993 when we used to go out, all this
Mm-hmm.
sort of stuff.
It's funny. This past Halloween that we had just a few weeks ago, there were a lot of people out here, even more than the last few years have been. So it was kind of fun to see that. It might have had something to do with the nicer weather we had that day too. It was, I think during the day I got up to about 70 degrees Fahrenheit. I don't know what that would be in Celsius, but yeah, so it was a nice, kind of unusually warm day, and then a lot of people were out. So that was a lot of fun. It's a great time just to see the imaginative costumes and just getting out and talking to your neighbors and all that. It's a lot of fun.
I will say though, there is more Maya and Henry novels coming.
All right.
I've got a few outlined that I'm working on. I'm going to try and get those out in the next couple of years.
Good. Yeah, I was gonna ask what's coming up next for you. What projects are you working on now?
I won't give too much away of it, but
Sure.
it's called the novel is called How to Hang the Moon,
Okay.
and it's inspired by J.D. Salinger.
Okay.
And it's kind of is about to keep it simple. It's about an author who achieves fame so quickly and intensely that she can't handle it, so she leaves Los Angeles in America to go to Port Hampton, where she used to spend her childhood.
Mm-hmm.
So she sort of retreats and becomes a recluse in this new English town. That's very basically what the novel's about.
Sure. All right.
But I'm on page 354.
Okay, so it's
a big one.
It's a big one. Yeah, it'll be bigger than than your other ones. So yeah, awesome. Well, yeah, I've got a hard out here at 3:00, but so I want to get things wrapped up. So if folks want to find you online, some of the work you've done, I know you've got a website. What can we? Where's that at, and what can we find there?
Best way to find out information and stuff is Instagram. I use Instagram a lot.
Sure. Okay.
So at Juno Jakob, Jakob. A lot of people spell it with a C, which really annoys me.
Yeah, get the K in there. Yeah. Atticus is on sale this week. So Juno, thank you for taking the time to chat with me today and just being open about all that you've had to go through to get to this point. So best of luck to you here this week and in the coming months.
Thank you very much for having me on.
Yep, you bet.